Welcome back to the Monkey Mind Lab. Today's guest is someone who, according to me, is the closest I've ever come to meeting a real-life Indiana Jones. We're thrilled to welcome Dr. James Fitzsimmons, archaeologist, professor of anthropology, and chair of the department at Middlebury College. Dr. Fitzsimmons is an expert in ancient Maya civilization with particular focus on mortuary archaeology, ritual practice, and the power of the dead in shaping social and political realities. He earned his PhD from Harvard, and for over 3 decades, he's been unearthing stories buried beneath stone temples and royal tombs in Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. His fieldwork has taken him deep into the tombs, temples, and ceremonial sites of Mesoamerica, where he studied how death, far from an ending, was a strategic tool for legitimizing rule, sustaining dynasties, and even for governing the living. He's the author of Death and the Classic Maya Kings and co-editor of Living with the Dead, Mortuary Ritual in Mesoamerica, both of which explore how ancestors not simply remembered, but actively consulted, venerated, and politically mobilized. His work challenges us to rethink the dead, not as passive memories, but as enduring actors in the living world. His upcoming book, Blood on the Wind, An Uncivil War in Classic Maya Lowlands, is set to be published later this year. Please welcome Dr. James Fitzsimmons.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. So I guess we'll go to the questions and I guess just see where this takes us.
Absolutely. We're going to let the monkey loose and see where it goes.
Let it loose.
All right. So I begin by asking all of my guests these 3 questions. What do you do? How do you get into it? And why do you do it?
So what do I do? Well, I'm an archaeologist. As you said, I've been working in Mesoamerica for, almost 3 decades now, maybe more. And I suppose I'm a specialist in mortuary stuff as well as hieroglyphs. I'm a very ex-Marxist spot archaeologist. Let's put it that way. I like sort of reading something in text and then seeing how that text plays out and then seeing how that plays out materially. So much of my work is sort of centered on you dig something and then you sort of see what the people write about it and see if they're telling the truth, right? So that's sort of what I do. As to how I got into this, well, I guess there's a bunch of different ways you could sort of think about it. But when I went to college, I was like every other college kid. I was pre-med.
Yeah.
and as I know, being pre-med, I go to college and I take a class my first semester called Olmec and Maya Civilization, and I loved it. And I began thinking about sort of maybe doing anthropology in some way, shape, or form long term. But I thought to myself, okay, well, I need to be good at this. So I was dumb. I went through the catalog and I assumed that the highest number that you had for the class was the most difficult thing in the book. And so I looked through the book because in those days it was a book. The last thing in the book was spoken Nahuatl, which is an Aztec language. It wasn't offered that semester. I did wind up taking it eventually. So I went with the next one up, and that was Introduction to Maya Hieroglyphs. And I loved it. More importantly, I was good at it. I was actually somewhat good at it. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I was somewhat good at it. And it sort of began a thing. I was one of those kids that would sort of go down into the basement of a building with a blackboard and sort of write on the board and practice my glyphs and try and decipher things. And it sort of began this love affair with hieroglyphs and archaeology that never really stopped. And so eventually sort of the pre-med stuff went away, but the glyphs didn't. And so that was sort of how I got into it. I'm trying to remember the third question. What was the third question?
Why?
There's a lot of reasons. Why do we get into things? Because we love them. That was probably the first reason, right? I think that being able to sort of uncover the past, figure out what happened, why it happened, how it happened, all that sort of stuff, especially for a society that is not really, the Maya are in the pop culture mind, but the people really aren't, certainly not the past people. And I think it's important to sort of bring that stuff to light. And so I sort of like to shed light on past events and things that people don't really know all that much about.
That's beautiful. Okay, so I think it's time to delve into the big question for the day.
Okay.
Can the dead rule the living?
Yes. When do they not rule the living is more the question. When do they not do this? So coming at this from a Maya perspective, sort of a classic Maya perspective, probably the first work that I did in the Maya area was on that stuff. It was on glyphs. I'd never even been to the Maya area when I started working on this stuff. And I started off sort of looking at anniversaries and things. I started finding patterns in the inscriptions that sort of linked people to birthdays and death anniversaries and all these sorts of things. And I noticed those patterns. And that's actually like, I published a paper. That's actually like how I got into Harvard. It's how the whole thing happened, right? And in those days, you could get into Harvard without even doing field work. So I'd actually did that and deciphered it and then sort of, got in that way. But what I noticed was that there were all these different events that were surrounding death. Sort of weird things. So not just like, oh, this person died, but like, oh, it's been 20 years and let's celebrate an anniversary of that death. It's been 30 years, 100 years, 200 years, and I started to think about sort of the dead kind of as an organizing principle for the Maya. And I never really stopped thinking of it that way. So I guess you could sort of approach this from a bunch of different perspectives. One way to sort of approach is that when someone dies in the Maya area, say during the Classic period, so from about 250 to about 850 or so, a Common Era, when someone dies, and if it's a ruler, their body is oftentimes put in a plaza or more often put into a building. And the Maya believed in partible souls, so souls that could actually splinter up into a bunch of different pieces, even multiple souls, multiple versions of souls. And so you would put a body into a building, and then it would ensoul the building on some level. And the building would become alive, and in some ways it would become a representative of the person. So, we're in Sunderland, right? Mm-hmm. So I want you to imagine if Sunderland, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, but if you imagine Sunderland was actually buried in Sunderland, like below Sunderland, like what that would be, right? And imagine the building Sunderland then becoming alive and people believing that building Sunderland was alive. And we're now doing a podcast like inside the body of Sunderland, right? And when you walk down the street, you see Sunderland.
Not creepy at all.
No, not creepy at all. Well, the thing is like it kind of isn't. I mean, I don't know. I think it's sort of you're sort of celebrating that person on some level, right? Mm-hmm. Right. I could go dark as well. Do you want me? Shall I go dark? Or?
Sure.
All right. Well, these are all authoritarian rulers too. Mm-hmm. So they're embodiments of living authoritarians that are watching you when you walk past them. So there's that too.
Big Brother's watching.
Well, that's what every stela was. That's what every big monument was. It was sort of these things were all alive, and you'd have to walk past them every day. Crazily enough, actually, you'd have to kill them too. Sometimes you could kill them. So you'd perform rituals to actually kill a building. And you'd kill the building so that you can actually put another building on top of it. And maybe you'd reinstall it again. Maybe you wouldn't, but you could build these things. And it's the same thing with monuments. So monuments themselves get killed. If you look at a lot of Maya sculptures, the noses are knocked off. And that's not just because they wanted to deface the monuments, but because they wanted to actually kill the rulers that are there.
Interesting.
Yeah. We were having this discussion in my Maya class the other day about whether that's a good thing or not a good thing. So whether it's being done by people who like the rulers or people who don't like the rulers.
Yeah.
Because when the site gets abandoned, when these Maya sites get abandoned, and about 850 or so, things are mostly abandoned in the southern lowlands. Not all. Some survive, but many of them are gone. Many of these buildings and these stelae are killed. And is it because they hate the people and they hate the authoritarians because the political system has collapsed? Or is it some people who actually like them and they know they're never coming back? And so they don't want to leave them basically just in the jungle.
Yeah.
It always makes me sort of wonder when you go to a museum and you see a Maya stela, for example, with its nose on. Like,
is it alive?
Is it alive? Yeah. It's hanging out behind glass something like that. It's sort of a rather creepy concept.
Yeah. Like a zoo of sorts.
A little bit, yeah. It's a little bit. And it sort of raises all kinds of ethical questions. Yeah. It raises just really gets us into some really strange territory. So I think, for the Maya, the dead sort of ruling the living and organizing the living, I think there's certainly an organizing principle. In terms of ruling, they're ancestors, right? And these are royal ancestors. And not to be dark again, but I'll go there anyway. One of the sort of fundamental rules about ancestor veneration in the Maya area is that not everybody gets to be an ancestor.
Okay.
It's just the important folks that get to be ancestors. It's what we call social memory. So you're sort of you mobilize memories, and you try to ensure that individual is remembered and sort of part of the national consciousness or the local consciousness and such. And so some people get to be ancestors, and some people don't get to be ancestors, right? And what you might conceive of in the classic Maya era anyway is people trying to sort of promote certain ancestors and keep their memories alive, and drawing upon those ancestors for inspiration, drawing upon them for advice, praying to them and such, but on some level also competing with them. Because if you're a ruler and you have a really famous dad or grandfather, and you keep promoting them, you're always going to be in their shadow.
Yeah.
There's no way out. And so there's this sort of uncomfortable territory that you get into, that you see in the Maya area, where people are honoring their ancestors and also trying to like downplay them a little bit so that they can actually have their moment in the sun. And sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're really not successful at all.
Interesting. So if there was a king who was going to try and take over a piece of land, would he have to kill the building in which the previous ruler was to be able to take it over? And it's kind of like a Horcrux then.
Yeah. So you want to? Okay. So we're gonna go Horcrux. Yeah. I mean, I think, how would this work? So when you see sort of conquest and on a major level, not just sort of a raid or a burning of a temple or something sort, but actual conquest, one of the possible actions there is to destroy the history of the site and rewrite it for yourself. That's a fairly common trope, not just Maya, it's lots of places. But another trope would be to take over that place. Maybe you do end up killing the building where the ancestor is, right? But there are cases where invading rulers will make up's not the right word. They will exaggerate, shall we say, their connection to the past. So they'll find some remote ancestors that they say they're related to. And then perform an ancestral ritual with that individual and being like, oh yes, this is what our connection to the site is. And, we were actually always here.
Yeah.
And, that's why so you get that kind of political sort of like, chicanery there. And that does happen. That happens, I believe it's Sebal. The site of Dos Pilas, I believe, goes into Sebal's royal tombs and basically they literally dig up some guy that's 200 years old, perform some sort of ritual like, oh yes, this is my ancestor. And, do people really believe that at the time? I don't know, but it's good political theater.
Interesting. So again, let's go off on a bit of a tangent here, and this is deviating from the Maya, but
Tangents will work. Yeah.
When would you say death really occurs? Is it? And I know we've looked at this from different angles, but let's just go into when do you think it occurs, and what does it mean for different cultures, and so on from there.
Okay. Well, I think it depends on who you talk to. It depends on the culture as to when you're actually dead, right? If you're going to go with a biological definition, for a while there's been this, if you're looking like sort of Western scientific community, this use of sort of whole brain death where like there's no brain activity measured and such at all, right? But if you ask people in a class when people die, you get lots of different responses. I remember one of the first responses we got was, oh, your heart stops. And I was like, wait a minute. You die when your heart stops. What is it, like someone has a heart attack and you just like point at them and you're like, dead. This is too bad. Like it's all over, right? Everything from that to, your soul has left your body, to when your brain stops or sort of, cells stop responding to things. There's all these different sort of gradations. And that leads us into some really scary territory because there would be cases based upon that sort of range when you could be dead, but not actually dead. And people could be doing things to you or doing things for you, and you're still kind of sort of there, right? So it raises some sort of interesting issues. I think one way to conceive of death is from a sort of, biological point of view, so biological death. And another way to conceive of death is sort of from a social death point of view. So when are you biologically dead versus when are you socially dead? And socially dead, there's a range for that as well. Everything ranging from no one remembers you, there's no interactions, you have no agency, there's nothing, to just a slight loss of agency, a slight loss in your ability to actually sort of affect the world around you.
Yeah.
And so you have this huge, huge gamut. And like actual death, it's gradual, right? And it's sometimes, social death can take place over, really a long period of time. So I think that's those are two ways to conceive of it. Another way to sort of conceive of it is in terms of whether you're dealing with sort of socially alive but biologically dead, or biologically alive and socially dead. And these are categories that we don't like, that make us uncomfortable, I think. These categories of these in-between categories. And there's lots of different ways one can sort of explore those issues. But social death, someone who's socially dead and but biologically alive, might be someone who's been ostracized from the community, or someone who is experiencing some form of imprisonment or marginalization in some way. You could sort of put that on the spectrum of social death, right? Whereas biologically dead and socially alive, then you're starting to get into territory where you're believing in ancestors, and there's an ability of the person to actually be able to affect the world around them in terms of agency. And there's plenty of cases of that. I mean, I think as per the sort of the original question, for the Maya, it doesn't work as well, but for the Andes, it works really well, where you have, archaeologically, where you have these mummies that are being created, right? But the mummies have a social life, and they're taken out, they're talked to, they're interacted with on a fairly regular basis. There's literally a skeleton at the feast.
Okay.
And, you're able to sort of interact with them, and they're able to get advice from them. And in the Andean case, there's a society called Chimu, the Empire of Timor, where the dead continue to own property. All the property they owned in life, they continue to own property. Even if they're royal dead, continue to own property.
Yeah.
And so the new royals basically have to go out and conquer things or build their own palaces and such because they don't technically own the other old ones.
Yeah.
The Inca love this idea when they take over, and they just run with it. And so it's a good example of like the dead actually ruling the living. It's almost like this empire of the dead. You have this living Inca emperor, and you have all these mummies, and they eventually bring the mummies into the Coricancha, into the palace, and it's almost, they haven't taken the mummies hostage, but it's almost like you have all these individuals with property rights that are now inside the living ruler's palace that they kind of sort of control.
So, trophies?
They're not trophies. They're actual mummies, and they're people you interact with. But theoretically speaking, the person has control of them, I suppose. Yeah, control over the dead.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And they still have that power to control the land and rule over it, essentially.
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's usually interpreters and people, priests and such you talk to and all that sort of stuff. All the oracular stuff that you would find in other parts of the world, the same basic idea. And we were joking earlier about the Maya, the sort of the temples and such. Those temples that are living temples, you have to like take care of those things.
Yeah.
So the ancestors, you have to feed those ancestors. If there's images of ancestors, you have to clothe those ancestors.
Okay.
It's your responsibility. And even the patron gods of sites are theoretically ancestors for the ruling families. So you have to take care of those. And when you don't take care of those, bad things happen to you. Your site collapses, you get attacked, something horrible happens to you. And it's never the ancestors' fault, it's always your fault.
So it's kind of like a much larger scale and way more important Tamagotchi pet.
Yes. If you don't take care of Tamagotchi pet, I don't know. I didn't have it. I grew up in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
I didn't have a Tamagotchi pet. I was a little bit old for that. But I never watched one die. But my guess is that would probably be really sad and horrible.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't take care of it, that's that. But the thing is like with an ancestor, they're not going to die. You're just going to get punished.
Yeah.
One of the fun bits about Mayan languages more generally is that, in some of the languages anyway, there's this sense of causality. So we have all these very abstract ways of describing when somebody does something that they shouldn't do. So like you break a window, right? Say a boy breaks a window, right? And the window was broken.
Yeah.
It was an accident, and there's all these ways to sort of explain the person who is breaking the window. My languages, no. My languages, it's like, no, the boy broke the window. It's like it's his fault, and you know it. And so on some level with these rulers and things, when they're not taking care of ancestors, it's not like, and they get attacked, they don't blame the people that attacked them. They blame the ruler that actually didn't do his job or her job.
Yeah.
It's like it's your fault.
You didn't appease the ancestors or the gods.
Buck absolutely stops there, and there's no escape from that.
Yeah.
It's sort of when things go badly for the rulers, it's rather telling. You'll see them; they lose support very quickly. When if you lose a really big battle, it's very oftentimes the case. It's because you didn't do something, and the support just falls away, and the whole system just goes away from them. They don't. There's not like this sense of like, you have authority and your authority is in stasis. No, your authority is never in stasis. You have to exert your authority. And if you don't exert it and exert it properly, you're done.
So all of this sounds pretty indefinite, right? Like even, okay, you're born for a certain number of years, you're alive, and then you die. And your property gets passed on because you no longer need it in the Western point of view, at least. But according to Maya and according to the Andes, you still have ownership of that. So can you ever break out of the spell or the power of the dead? Is there procedures for that?
It's a way to break out. Okay, well, for the Andes, the short answer is not really.
Okay.
For the Andes, the short answer is not really. I mean, all of this is theoretical, right? So in reality, the Inca ruler that's alive is controlling everything, and in reality, the Inca rulers, the power is sort of absolute there. It's more of a theoretical sort of construct thing. It's like the underpinnings of religion, right? And how well do people follow these sorts of things, right? So, but theoretically, no. For the Maya, I wouldn't say that they that the Maya are continuing to own the property after they're dead. They just sort of I don't know. They end up being everywhere. Is there a way out? Sort of. So one of the things that happens in the Maya area is that people tend to revisit the dead quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So people will go, much like for the Andes, right? They'll go into tombs. Some tombs will actually have little doors that you actually just can kind of go in and crawl in, and like with steps you can go down in and sort of visit and such. And you'll see people dropping off things, right? But there's pretty good evidence they're actually taking stuff too, and they're modifying things. So you'll have instances where people will go into a burial, right? And they'll wait until the sort of the body is skeletonized, and then they'll paint the body a color. They usually paint it red. Mm-hmm. Usually paint it with hematite or something sparkly, right? People love sparkly stuff. They always paint it with sparkles. No, it is. It's like there's like this. One of the things about sort of Maya buildings and just the color red in the Maya area, a lot of it in terms of the architecture and something. A lot of the stuff is actually hematite, so it's glitter. So when you imagine an ancient Maya temple, you imagine something that's gray or brown, but the past is not gray or brown. It's like not black and white. It's actually in color, right? Yeah. The past is in color, and in this case, it's sparkly. It's like a glitter bomb. And so someone so someone going into these burials, they're painting it red, but it's kind of sparkly, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of sparkly red, right? And
they love shiny things.
It's never not been true. It's like it's just everywhere you go. It's like people love shiny things. So yeah, people go into these temples and they sort of go into the tombs and things, and they'll paint the body, they'll take stuff out and such. How do we know they're going in? One, because some of these things have just purpose-built entrances, but two, when they move the body, let's just say that sometimes the putting the body back together as it was after you've disassembled it, the folks who are doing this don't necessarily have. They're putting some of the pieces back wrong. So the pieces will be moved. There'll be things that are kind of like, oh, this is kind of out of order. There'll be things that are missing, like, little phalanges of hands and feet might be missing. Things end up going missing. On top of all that, there'll be things that people will take out of the tombs and then put in their own burials. Oh. So there'll be bones of other people that are in the burials with them, right? Okay. Some of this is hostile. Some of this will be like war captives where there's like a spite thing where there's like, you'll take a war captive's bone and you'll carve the name of the war captive on it and you'll keep it and it's yours forever. It's like it's mine, right? But sometimes it might actually be reverential, and you're taking these things and they're your ancestors and you're being buried with more of your ancestors, right? So going into these tombs, it on some level it sort of revisits death, but it revisits death from a rather safe space. Mm-hmm. So long after sort of whatever political things have happened, whatever the fallout has been, whatever social things were happening at the time, grief, all that sort of stuff, you'll get in the Maya area all this sort of revisiting these tombs, and you're doing it from a position of strength, or at least from a position where you've had some time to actually think about what's happened, right? Yeah. Because somebody dies, there's oftentimes a lot of things that are happening all at once, and you're kind of it's confusing, right? And this is not just the Maya. It's a practice called secondary burial. It happens all over the world. But this idea of secondary burial happens all over the place. And so when they re-enter these burials, they do so as a political statement, but also from this sort of safe space. It's almost like you revisit the death, but the people around you know you succeeded. They know that the succession is no longer in trouble. They know that everything was okay. And so it's almost like revisiting death and then being like, well, look what happened. Everything's wonderful. Like, we survived. Everything's great, right? So there's a political statement to it. Can they escape the dead? Well, by going into these things, they highlight it, but they also highlight the fact that they themselves were the successor and that they're fine and everything's fine.
Yeah.
So they're kind of breaking free of ancestors by interacting with ancestors, weirdly enough. It's almost like you're revisiting it, but you're done. The crisis is over. You don't have to worry about this stuff anymore. I'm in charge. Ha ha ha. That kind of thing. So there is that escape there. On top of all that, usually a given ruler they might demolish a temple and put another one on top of it, and it might even be an ancestor's tomb, but theirs is always on top.
Okay.
And it's always bigger and it's always better. So on some level, no, they can't escape, but at the same time, yeah. The only thing that anybody walks around when they see Sunderland is New Sunderland.
Yeah.
They don't see Old Sunderland.
Yeah. And you see that happen quite a bit where a leader will take over a new institution or kingdom or whatever, and then will really try their best to step out of the shadow of the previous one, maybe undoing some of the stuff they did, breaking things down. And I mean, you can see this even in corporates or schools or whatever. Like, people will really try hard to assert themselves, to step out of the shadow.
Oh yeah, we call it rebranding. Yeah, that's what it is.
That's a polite word for it.
It's a polite word for it. Yeah.
And that raises questions for me related to the ancient Maya to a certain extent, but also other cultures. You can be present as a monument, a building, a tree, but there are also ways in which people ensure you can't, like the Tibetans in burial, for example. So is there, in any culture that you're aware of, such practices of renewal, if not reincarnation or rebirth, but also punishment and ensuring that you can't do that?
So in the Maya case,
yeah,
for some reason, monkey minds. Somehow I'm still wandering around the Maya area.
Okay, let's go with it.
In the Maya case, yes. So one of the things that happens with defeated rulers and sort of just defeated folks more generally is that they're stripped of their generative power. They're stripped of their abilities and such. And on some level, they are broken down essentially before they're killed. If they're going to be killed, they're broken down before they're killed, and they take away a lot of the things that these rulers, nobles, and such are supposed to have. So not just their titles, but like their innate creative abilities. There's something called chabakab, right? This innate ability where they actively say that this person is machab, ma'akab. So this person doesn't have it, and we're taking it away from them. So they'll have a captain, and they'll actually take it away from them, right? This sort of generative power. And they make sure that you are, they might, I suppose they're commemorating your defeat. And so I guess they're immortalizing you in that sense. But you eventually sort of get turned into essentially food for a building. Like, they sort of dismembered, broken down, just turned into food for the earth, essentially. And on some level, you're forgotten, or you're co-opted into the narrative of the victor. So they co-opt you and your family into the narrative of the victor, and you as an independent entity cease to exist. Mm-hmm. So there's that. In terms of you're talking about sort of the politics of like forgetting, right? Or you sort of forget folks. Yes, there are plenty of places where people sort of intentionally forget. People are where their names are scratched out, intentionally not spoken, intentionally forgotten and not remembered. In the Maya case, as I said, some people get to be ancestors, some people don't get to be ancestors. And the ones that don't get to be ancestors, they're forgotten, and that's that, right? And there are cultures, yes, where people are, we're going to cover the Kayabi, where you intentionally forget them. And it's, some cultures it's a punishment, like we're just not going to remember you. So like the example that comes to mind is like ancient Egypt, right? Akhenaten, his name gets scratched out. They try and basically just erase this person from history, right? And then there's other cases where actually the forgetting is on purpose and it's a blessing. It's like so you don't dwell on the past and you don't sort of dwell on the dead person. But in terms of sort of intentional forgetting as punishment, yeah, that's pretty common.
You raised an interesting point about the tombs and these things that they're breaking down and building up and really as status symbols. But if we go down into the politics of it, would you say that legacy is a form of government? And let's tie that to what tombs do politically. Do they have some sort of political capital that they hold?
Yeah, they absolutely do. So you sort of think about what legacy and political capital. I think just by interacting with these places, you create a sense of you create capital on some level. The tombs have cachet. It's like, you'll find a tomb, for example, and they'll reorient the entire site to that tomb. And so a ruler or someone that's sort of on shaky grounds can look back into the past and talk about how wonderful things were then, and then link themselves to how wonderful those things were there, and then be like, well, it's gonna be like that again. Mm-hmm. We're gonna revisit
the golden days.
Whatever this fictional golden age is. I keep looking for this fictional golden age. Where is this fictional golden age? I don't know. It's always in the past, and it's always remote, and you can never actually get a sense of what that golden age was.
Yeah.
I don't like. Yeah. There's always a golden age in the past, right? Things are always better, and so someone who is on shaky footing will oftentimes use these tombs as cultural capital. So you harken back to a time when the site was or the place was really, really good, and you link yourself to that ruler in some way. Familial relationship, I have secret knowledge, I'm talking to them, that sort of thing. And then that helps shore up your own rule. And then, not to be cynical, but then once things are actually relatively solid, one of the things that happens is they stop talking about that person. You move on to something else, right? But the sort of the places where we find things are really, really shaky, you get ancestors thrown in like pretty much in anything, right? Mm-hmm. Sort of a word on the past, you might find this sort of strange for an archaeologist to say, but the past is a horrible place. You don't want to go there. You don't want to go there.
Oh, yeah.
It's a horrible place. Yeah. I don't care what year it is, it's a horrible place. And people are like, oh, you're an archaeologist. So, if you had a time machine, would you go back? And I'm like, no, not really. I think that would be a bad idea. Maybe if I was in a hermetically sealed bubble, I couldn't get killed. I couldn't die of cholera or whatever diseases, I wouldn't get attacked or killed or maimed in some way.
Yeah.
Maybe I might just go to fly on the wall just to see what's, am I right? Right. But no, not really. I would never want to go back. And so this fascination with going back into the past and that person from Dos Pilas going back into Ceibal and being like, oh, it's 200 years ago. I think they're trying to harken back to this sort of fabled golden age of Ceibal, but I don't know if there ever really was one. I mean, I think or there always was one, and you're just picking an arbitrary point. Right?
Yeah.
But no, the past is a horrible place. Don't go there. It's sort of when you think about where at any time in human history have people been more connected than they are right now? Not really. In terms of sort of dire poverty, it's not. You go back into the past, it's so much worse.
Yeah.
You want to bring death into this, like infant mortality rates. Mm-hmm. Like no, I don't want to go back there.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you mentioned it can be used as political capital to influence things and get things done. So would you say that death is perhaps one of the oldest forms of propaganda?
Mobilizing dead, sure. Mobilizing the dead, absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. One of the first agricultural civilizations in the Middle East, and by first agricultural civilizations in the Middle East, I mean one of the first agricultural civilizations, period, right, was this group called the Natufians. And the Natufians, they were at the beginning of agricultural societies. I would not say that they had great lives. Anywhere you go in the world where people are transitioning to agriculture, it's usually a very bad time. Mm-hmm. People are malnourished, they are anemic, they have higher incidence of war and much higher mortality rates. It's just a terrible time. Mm-hmm. So these Natufians, some of the first farmers, they're living horribly, right? I'd say that I would not want to. That's like a time machine. That's an insta kill. I don't want to go back there, right? This is really bad, right? And one of the first things that you see among those farmers are these sets of skulls that have been plastered over with ancestors' faces on them. It's one of the first things. And in general, when you see these kinds of things, it's usually has to do with property rights. So you have these ancestors that are sort of brought up, and so the theory goes, at least, is that they're basically being used as a way of sort of marking territory, property rights, ownership. My ancestors were here first. I own this land. All that sort of stuff, right? That's about as old as propaganda as I can get. Imagine those Natufians, with their skulls and things, and now imagine somebody who like arrived there but managed to somehow sort of scheme their way into the system, like getting a random skull, like putting some plaster on and being like, "Look, I've been here for a long time." Yes, absolutely. You see this sort of stuff, this quick built stuff all the time. We like to think the people in the past is like, they're so different from us. They're not that different. I'll give you two examples. One example would be like Angkor Wat, for example. If you ever go to Angkor Wat, have you ever been to Angkor Wat or anywhere?
I haven't.
Okay.
No.
So if you go to Angkor Wat and you go to the sort of the main temple there, and you look at the building, it looks like it's made out of solid stone. It's actually not made out of solid stone. The archaeologists, when they sort of reconstructed it, and when things have been reconstructed there, the restoration crew, they show what's underneath, and what it is basically really hardened clay. That's a really sort of like not like really light air dry clay, but still really hardened clay with stone face. So it makes it look like it's really old.
Yeah.
Right. The same thing goes for the Maya. You look at Maya buildings, you see these big soaring pyramids, and you think to yourself, oh, these are really well-made, beautiful buildings. Some of them are well-made, but pretty much at the heart of it, it's a bunch of boulders connected with some mortar and then stone face that's cut on the outside to make you think that this thing was built and just amazing. But really what they did was they kind of cut corners. And, and they sort of did this, to sort of make it seem like these things have always been there and are gigantic. Think of the ruler, right? They're building up on their predecessor's pyramid. Maybe their predecessor's pyramid isn't all that great, and they want to make a big splash, so they built up something really quickly. I used to work at a site called Zapote de Babal in Guatemala, where at a certain point the site didn't have a long history. People were excavating there. I remember I brought some students with me, including some Middlebury students, and they were excavating this place. And I go away. I leave them to dig in a pit, and I go away for a while, and I come back. And I see them just hacking away. And I look at them and they're like, yeah, this floor is really hard to get through. And I was like, what are you doing? Why are you digging through bedrock? And I guess they just didn't expect it. It turned out the bedrock was maybe 50 centimeters from the surface.
Wow.
Someone had gone to that site and gotten there, and it's almost like somebody was like, build me this ancient site. And so they went there and they put up all these monuments and all these buildings and such, but they were like one construction phase, two construction phases tops. Refurbished maybe once in their lifetimes. So really, really shallow time depth. It's like one of those, like, you ever watch like an Old West movie, like one of those really old spaghetti westerns where you see those like Old West towns and the set of it is just a flat building with some props in the back. That's what Zapote de Babal was. It was just built up like, we're gonna build it up like this, and it's gonna be great, guys. Don't worry. Like everyone's gonna believe this is really old, right?
No one's gonna know.
No one's gonna know. Like I used to come back from the site every day, and I come back and like, oh, I discovered three stela today, and or 4 sculptures today, and people in camp, after the first couple of days, we got really bored. They're like, oh, whatever. But I was excited. And we figured out that it was actually that shallow time depth. I was like, oh, that's what's going on. It's just like somebody. Yeah. And you look at the ceiling and you're like, oh, okay, well, actually, a lot of them are not carved. And they're just kind of like stones that were put up, right? So it's the same with, these Natufians, where you can imagine some of the stuff being faithfully put up and being used, and people are sort of using their ancestors. And there's a faith component to this. I don't want to make light of this. People believe in this stuff, right? So there's a faith component to this. It's a religious thing, right? But you could also imagine that one scheming guy, Natufian, is like, oh, I got here a little late. Look, ancestor. Look what I got. Ancestor property rights.
Yeah.
So I imagine that, you go to any society, any archaeological culture, you're going to find those kinds of individuals. So, yeah.
And even if you look at funerals, many of the Maya royal burials were quite literally choreographed. And some of the stuff, we've spoken about it, even the bloodletting and drawing the rope through the tongue might have actually been just making a hole with an obsidian dagger and something else rather than the full thing. Right?
Yeah, I might get in trouble for this, but yes, it's almost certainly not real. It's almost certainly like they might be doing something that's bloody, but it kind of sort of looks like some of the stuff is just for show and being done, but maybe being done in a more sanitary way than the actual object suggests.
So then how does one separate authentic belief from the political theater of funerals and rituals and death?
That's very hard to do. I think I tend to view these things in a sort of a multifaceted way. So do I believe that, people grieve their dead? Say even the rulers. Right? Do I believe that the ruling family, were grieving their dead? Yeah, I do. Do I believe that there were enterprising people who would use this material to sort of advance their political careers? Yes, I do. And I think that teasing those things out is difficult, if not impossible. I think there are certain places, Piedras Negras among them, actually. I used to work on the border of Guatemala and Mexico, a place called Piedras Negras. Piedras Negras and some other places in the Maya area, there's a personal quality to their inscriptions where they like to talk about really personal events. It was kind of how I found the anniversary stuff from the beginning, really specific things, death anniversaries and, birthdays. Birthdays was strange. I didn't know there were birthdays existed before that, right? They actually celebrated birthdays.
But
really,
they didn't name their kids.
Doesn't look like they named their kids, or if they did, well, they named them, but not with their formal names. Probably not. No,
not until the age of 5 or 6 or something.
Yeah, 5 or 6 or something. You might get more of a name. Yeah, but I would say so Piedras Negras really there's a lot of really personal information, and at some places they don't have the personal information at all. Mm-hmm. It seems like it's almost an idiosyncratic thing. There's an archaeologist named Stephen House who sort of talked about this. I think some of this stuff is idiosyncratic, and maybe in the places where we find that really personal information, I think I could maybe believe that it's sincere. I mean, you're directing people to really put together really specific stuff about your life. Because keep in mind, all of these things are big, they're massive sculptures. They're all political. They're all going to be political propaganda. But really weird personal information in a propaganda monument seems, maybe I'm wrong. It just feels more true. It feels like, oh, this is really strange for an authoritarian leader to be talking about their birth, not their birthday, but like the 4th anniversary of their death, their dad's death day. It seems like, okay, maybe that's probably right.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm naive, but it sort of seems like that. So maybe you would look for places where you have those kinds of personal information and try and tease that apart. But I think that'd be very, very difficult to do. So maybe the lesson in all of this is not to sort of think of these as separate things, but to think of them as all things that are from the same individual. It's kind of like this. It's like I'm a college professor, right? But that's not all I am. And I have, I behave in a certain way. I dress a certain way. I mean, look at this. Right? Do we think I don't go to bed in this? I don't think I go to sleep in this. Like I don't walk around my house like this.
Though you are infamous for walking around with bones and random skulls just around campus.
I do, unfortunately, walk around with bones and skulls on campus. You'd be surprised, actually. And where's the camera? The camera's there. You'd be surprised how many people don't even notice that. Like I can walk around with like a case and like nobody even. It actually is a little freaky. I don't like that. They don't know. It's like, oh, what are you doing? Like I could be walking down campus with like a skull in each hand, and like nothing happens. Like no one notices. I could just walk down the street, and I keep wondering to myself, like, how is it that they don't notice? So I don't dress like this normally and such, right? So I have that aspect to my personality, right? But I'm also a father. I'm a husband. I have hobbies. I have a life.
Gaming, I believe.
I do gaming, yes. I do love my gaming, yes. So, there are other things that I'm doing, right? And I do all of those things at once. And so if we think about sort of, an individual in the past, we have to think of those individuals in the past as multifaceted too. Mm-hmm. We have to think of them as all having different motivations and ideas. So maybe that scheming person with the skull is also still grieving.
Yeah.
And they can both be the same individual, and it's not a contradiction. The sort of a person is not just one thing. There
Yeah.
are a bunch of things. And so that's sort of that's kind of how I would view it. Teasing it apart, I think, is very, very difficult. So I just sort of embrace the multifaceted aspect of folks when I do this sort of research.
We were talking about monuments and everything.
Yeah.
Would you say national monuments, funerals, obituaries are versions of the same old thing with a new spin to it?
They absolutely are. They absolutely are. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is a cenotaph.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And it's a spot for reflection and remembrance, right? And it's something that actually has power and has the ability to actually really sort of not just evoke emotion, but also sort of respect. There's all this, you can attach yourself to ceremonies surrounding the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and you get it's like auto creds, right? It's like you automatically have like some sort of authority there,
Yeah.
right? And you can attach yourself to that narrative, and then you become part of that narrative, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and that narrative becomes part of your narrative, right?
Yeah.
And so you can co-opt these things. So absolutely, people co-opt contemporary dead stuff all the time. So I had a question about sort of the how to sort of plays out in other cultures and things. And one of the things you sort of brought up was sort of Tibetan, sort of the Tibetan readings that we did a while back. And one of the sort of interesting things about sort of Tibetan funerals and such is that we think of sky burial, right? But there are other forms of interacting with the dead and sort of taking care of the dead in Tibetan culture, right? In classical sort of the classic thing, right? And so there's obviously cremation and things like that. But I think we were alluding to sort of this punishment stuff earlier. One of the things that is sort of lesser known about this is that, at least traditionally, burying individuals in the ground is kind of a no-no. You kind of don't want to do that, and that's reserved for sort of criminals and folks that basically you kind of don't want around.
Yeah.
While the goal of sort of reincarnation, the goal of sort of Tibetan sky burial and things of that sort is reincarnation, sort of expel the soul, get the soul to the afterlife as soon as possible. The goal here is to actually almost take them out of circulation. So you're burying them in the ground, and they don't really have the opportunity to the soul doesn't really have the opportunity to leave the body, or at least it's kind of trapped there.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't know if it's trapped forever. Theoretically, I mean, bodies rot, right? So I don't know. But you're kind of trapped in there for quite a while, and that to me is sort of a rather scary prospect. And it's sort of something where you can sort of see the contemporary world and punishment making its way into sort of the treatment of the dead, and even after they're dead, right? So you see that.
And just for our viewers who don't know what sky burials are, it's actually very similar to practice in India, practiced by the Parsi community, Zoroastrianism, where they will essentially leave your body to be consumed by birds and vultures. In Tibetan culture, it's in the mountains, and they dice the body up.
Yeah.
But with the Parsi community, it's more the Tower of Silence, and I don't think they dissect you up there. But it's also being weaned off now, I believe. They're leaning towards other means of disposing of the body.
Yeah,
But,
the reason why sky burial exists in part is because cremation might be the preferred version, right? But there's no timber.
Yeah.
There's no wood, and so it sort of you go towards the sky burial so that you can actually let go of that body as quickly as possible, but you don't have the wood to sort of to practice cremation. Yeah.
And the entire thing of being rushed about it is that state of limbo in between when you're dead, but you're not fully accepted by the ancestors yet.
Yep.
And how when the closer you are, the more you kind of take on, and the faster you want to get rid of it, because that means they haven't moved on yet. And it's fascinating to look at the different perceptions of how death is good in some ways, is the next step, but also in some aspects it's a burden. And do we see that in any other cultures or from any other research being done in anthropology?
So death as being a burden.
Both a burden and a good thing, how kinship plays into that.
I think kinship, sort of the way one can conceive of kinship in funerary ceremonies and things, is that burials are sometimes, funerary ceremonies in general, are a way to sort of highlight the dead, right? But they're also moments when relationships between people can be negotiated and renegotiated. It's you have this rent in the social fabric, so to speak, right? And this idea that sort of the group is now coming to a whole, and trying to sort of come to grips with that, and trying to reintegrate into something new, or to sort of become something new. That's sort of at least one theory of how this sort of stuff works. And so for families, families fight. families. Some people don't get along. There's always Uncle Larry, right? You don't get along. You don't get along with that. Might not get along with that person, right?
Yeah.
But so the funerals are for kinship wise. They're moments where the family can actually sort of come together and renegotiate their relationship, including with Uncle Larry, right?
Yeah.
You have that sort of that renegotiation there. And so, yeah, I mean, you see that those kinds of negotiations and renegotiations. I mean, they happen all over the world. We were talking about sort of the Tibetan sky burial stuff. The idea behind that is to let go of the dead as soon as possible. And so the family very oftentimes is actually there. They're there when that happens. And, people are encouraged to sort of watch. Children too. They're encouraged to watch so that you let go, because it's sort of this idea of sort of letting go. I mean, the body is just a body. The person isn't there anymore, right? And in part, that on some level causes that kin group to become closer. It causes that kin group to have that shared experience, right? But also to sort of recognize, okay, well, that individual is not there anymore, and to sort of make a finality to that experience.
Closure.
Closure, yeah.
Yeah.
You need closure, yeah.
Yeah.
So absolutely, it does happen.
Okay. What's it like being an archaeologist? Is it everything that the movies presented to be?
Is it everything the movies presented to be? No, it's absolutely not. So what's it like? So most of your days, I hate to tell you this, but sort of most of your days are spent either supervising excavations. If you get to my point, right? Most of your days are spent either supervising excavations, fundraising, and really spending very little time in the actual field, right? Many of the days are like this. If you end up being a sort of a project director or something like that, you become more and more and more divorced from the actual field work. However, if you're not in that position, or if you're working in a smaller group, or it's a smaller project or something of that sort, you do have more, better interactions. I would say that even on your best on your best project, right, for that sort of thing, you might have a day like that. You might have a day where there's a little bit more adventure, things of that sort. And honestly, I live for those days. I absolutely live for those days. I live for the stories. It's not as glamorous as you think. You're sitting there with a pen and your paper, and you've got your toothbrush or your brush or something. You're brushing things off, but it's not every day like that.
Yeah.
What I would say is that you do have days like that, and those days can range from, brushing off something and being the first person to read it in 2,000 years. I've had that experience. It's a wonderful experience, just being the first person, right? You find a flute in the ground, right? What do you think you do?
Well, play it.
You play it. You absolutely play it. You absolutely play it. You absolutely play it. Or at least, I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't, but you absolutely do. Like there's this urge, right, to like, what would happen if I play it? Unfortunately, I'm a big sucker for like, what would happen if scenarios. What happened if I did this scenarios? And so yes, so you live for those kinds of days, right? And so you want to hear some crazy stories. I'll give you a couple crazy stories. I'll give you one related to a near-death experience, since we're talking about death. And I'll give you one related to a dead experience. Not me, but if give you some sort of sort of a tomb, right? All right, you want near-death experiences, and I gave them a whole bunch of them, and they chose one where I almost got killed by bees. I'm not going to tell that story here today. But another one, sort of a shorter one, was one involving a truck. So you're talking about sort of the truck stuff, right? So it's sort of being thrown by, I think I alluded to it in the cocoon story, but it's basically about being thrown from a moving car, and it was actually a truck. So what happened? So I'm on my way to work one day, and the day before I went on this work, and this is a long time ago. No matter when it is, it's before I worked at Middlebury. I'm just saying.
Okay.
And this one actually, I think so. So the day before, I was in this truck, and I had learned this practice from an archaeologist named Carl Taube, I used to work with at Copan. He was my old housemate, wonderful guy. And he, in Copan, and then from then onwards that we would do this, you'd get in a truck. We used to call it truck surfing.
Okay.
Don't ever try this at home, folks. I don't know, whoever's listening to this, do not do this, right? You do stupid things when you're in your 20s and early 30s, and this is one of them. So, like you're in a pickup truck, and you, in Central America at least, there's a bar on the back of the cab that kind of extends from the back of the cab up from the one side across the back of the cabin and then bottom, such that if you're standing in the back of the truck, you could actually hold on to it, right? And some trucks will actually have bars all the way around for everybody to hold on because you pile into the trucks, right? But this one just had one of these, right? And this particular truck, I jumped in the truck one day, the day before all this sort of happens, and I get in the back, I stand up, and I say, "Surf's up," and we hit the top of the truck, like bang, 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 hit the top of the truck, and that's the signal for the driver to basically gun it and drive as fast as they can. Now these are on dirt roads. And if you've ever driven on a dirt road at high speed, you know that you have a tendency to slide around someplace. So you're kind of hoping for potholes. And luckily for us, there's lots of potholes. And the potholes kind of slow the thing down, but they also make it a lot more fun because you're like flying all over the place. So you're hanging on for dear life and this person's driving, right? And so you're just hitting these potholes like bang, 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 just, bang through these potholes. And we go on for quite a while and everything's fine. It's no accident, no problems, no nothing, right? So the next day, I'm in the truck and I'm sitting in the back of the truck on the back corner of where the bed is. So sitting on the left back corner, right, of the bed, but on top of the actual like sides of the truck.
Yeah.
Right? And these trucks, oftentimes, when you're going to work anywhere in rural, say in this case, this is rural Guatemala. You go to work on these days, and these trucks tend to be almost like buses. They'll just pick up anybody on the side of the road and help transport them further along because there aren't any buses.
Yeah.
The town that I was working in was very, very sort of economically, it was really, really, really rough. People had work maybe 6 months out of the year or something like that. It was rough. And so you'd pick people up and take them because that's the only transportation they had. It's like no cars. And so we'd pick up school kids. You pick up, I don't know. You pick up all kinds of people on the side of the road. So we pick up some school kids. We pick up, We pick up some guys work on their way to work with machetes. They have all these machetes in there.
Okay.
It's a ton of machetes, a ton of machetes. You pick up this one guy who has like a bunch of firewood, just a ton of firewood, and a big chainsaw, a big gigantic chainsaw that he has with him. And he gets in the truck, and you just keep piling more and more and more people into this. So we're driving along on this dirt road, and we're sort of going along, and we're probably going maybe 25, 30 miles an hour, something like that. And, the truck serving from the previous day, and this was a fairly common occurrence. People would do this. People, unfortunately, with or without someone driving in the back of the truck, people usually drive way too fast on these dirt roads, and they hit those potholes. And the potholes, it's not like there's like the mother of all potholes. It's like the mother, and like the mother's had babies, and then there's like the mother has like there's like sisters, and like there's like there's like the potholes everywhere.
Yeah.
So in any event, there's a lot of wear and tear on these trucks. So we're driving along about 25, 30 miles an hour with all these folks in the back, and suddenly the truck just goes whomp, like it just goes off to the side, like whomp, right? And what had happened was not one but two wheels of the truck had come off. And so the truck just goes, basically on its side. And we go flying out of the truck. I go flying out of the truck. The kids go flying out of the truck. The guy with the chainsaw is flying through the air. His chainsaw is flying through the air. And it's kind of doing one of these like wheel things past me. And if you ever watch like a Deadpool movie or something, like what I'm talking about, it's like you have this moment where like things just kind of stopped, and you have time to think to yourself like, oh God, this is going to be really bad.
Yeah.
Like really bad. And I'm watching this, and I see this spinning chainsaw, and it goes past my head, and we all go flying into a ditch. So your parents are always like, oh, you could be dead in a ditch somewhere. So I'm actually in a ditch, right?
Been alive so far.
Miraculously, no one is hurt. No one. Everyone just flies out and they fly out, and they act like it's normal. Like everybody acts like it's just like everyone's acting like it's normal.
Okay.
And I'm kind of like I'm on the ground. I'm in the ditch. And I remember seeing there was a barbed wire fence on the other side of the ditch, and there were a couple of cows. And in Guatemala, they use they're sort of the Bos Indicus, the cows like that you find in India, the ones with the humps on them,
Yeah.
And they're looking at me, and I'm looking at them, and they moo, and I just kind of go like, moo, And they're looking at me, and I'm like confused. I get up, I'm like, what just happened? And the weird part is that not only does everybody act like this is perfectly natural and it's like they've like done this before, right? And they had done this before.
Okay.
But everybody just gets up. We find the two wheels down the side of the road, and we put the wheels back in the truck, and we just keep going. We just like go back to work. And so we drive off to the site. And this is the site of Zapote Ball, right? Where I was working at the time in Guatemala. And, you know, I live for those days. I live for that stuff, you know. And, you know, as I said, each one of these experiences that I have, they've made me a bit more cautious. You know, it's kind of like when you're in your 20s, you think you're invincible, right? And when you're in your 30s, you hope you're invincible. When in your 40s, you know you're not invincible. And I'm like 50. I'm 51 now. I think I don't know what the 50s are like. My sense is that you hope it's like your 40s, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
I imagine the 60s is you know you're not. It's not your 40s. I don't know. We'll see. Right. So you get into these situations. So I live for these days. And so we get to Zapote Ball. Now, this is related to the second story. The second story is really short, but it's sort of an interesting one. It has more to do with death than the other one. This one was sort of like I don't know if I almost died because like nobody got hurt, but just when I think about it, I'm like, oh my God, like what was I doing? You know?
There was turned over trucks and slow motion
chainsaws and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was the funny part. I think I told you the other day, like that wasn't actually even the first time that a truck had wheels had fallen off of a car. I was there. So we go to Zapote Ball, and this is the same season, but it's I don't think it's the same day, but it's the same season. And Zapote Ball, you know, one of the things about sort of studying burials and tombs and things is that, and this is more on a more somber note, there's a lot of looting. You know, most sites have been looted pretty badly. It looks like bombs have gone off, and there's like holes in everything. Wherever you go, there's holes everywhere. And so we were in this. We were at the site, and we found a looter's tunnel going into this pyramid. And we get into this pyramid, and we crawl through the looter's tunnel and crawl through the hole into the pyramid. And myself and my co-director at the time, a woman named Laura Gomez, great archaeologist, we go in there, and we see this tomb, and it's very sad because the tomb itself has been looted, everything's been taken out. You know, we later found. The bones were all gone. There was like the bones were like, well, they weren't in where they were supposed to be. The bones were like in another part of the tunnel that someone had just like taken the bones and just like thrown them somewhere. And so we took the bones out. And we wanted, you know, try to do something with those. And so the tomb itself was completely empty. And there was a tomb inside the tomb. There was like a depressed area where the body would have been. It was sort of like a depression where the body would have been. And then there was like an incline where the head would be. So if you were to find a tomb and it was completely empty, there's nobody in it, and you see a depression where the body would be, and you see like a thing where the head would be, what would you do? What would be your first impulse?
Walk away. I wouldn't want to be in the tomb.
Okay, all right, fine. But like, if you were actually working in a tomb and trying to figure out what was going on, what would you do?
Dig.
Oh, you would dig. Oh, no, I didn't dig because it was already looted, right?
Yeah.
No, my instinct was to actually lay down. So I laid down in the hole. Now, why?
Just like pretend you're dead.
No. I laid down in the hole because I saw that there was a lift for where the head would be, and I was like, I don't know what's going on with that. Like, that's not normal. Right? Yeah. And so I lie down in there, and I have my head kind of propped up, and then I realized that when I'm in there and I'm lying down with my head propped up, I'm looking at a wall, a specific point on the wall.
Yeah.
There was a plaster mask on that wall. It was a mostly decayed plaster mask, but there was a plaster mask on the wall. So the person, when they were buried, was buried so that they would always be looking at this plaster mask. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
You know, this idea of sort of like, you know, this like, when you die, what is the thing that you want to be like? You know, this person was seeing like in death forever and ever, right? This person, and it was really sad. Like the person, you know, obviously the person was the tomb was destroyed. We went in there and like looks like somebody like just destroyed the whole thing, right? But it was sort of a really sort of amazing kind of moment. And what was strange about that moment was that there was a burial that was excavated at Piedras Negras about a year before I started working on site. I was working in the lab at the time, but actually on site. There's a burial that was excavated the year before. And there was this mirror that was buried with this individual. And the mirror had an inscription on it, which was it was a severed head on the mirror that was actually like carved into the mirror.
Okay.
It was a severed head carved in the mirror, and it actually had the name of the of the person whose severed head it was supposed to be on the mirror. And the name of the person and the place where they were actually from was actually supposed to be a ball. So it's many years later, I sort of thought about this. I'm like, oh. And this mirror had been arranged such that the dead person was always going to look at it. They'd always look at it and see their face. And so they buried it so that the mirror would actually, of the dead person, they would see this captive that they had taken many years before, and they'd always see it.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was really kind of, I don't know, poignant,
Powerful.
a little spiteful, powerful.
Yeah.
It was a whole bunch of things all at once. And I didn't, at the time when I looked at it, I wasn't really affected by it. But when I was in that tomb at Sapoto Ball, I sort of realized, oh, this is what they wanted them to experience.
Yeah.
And it was sort of it was a powerful moment. So even a cenotaph, and it wasn't a cenotaph, but it was an empty tomb.
Yeah.
Even something with empty can actually tell you something.
Wow. Yeah. So I now ask you, if you'd like to say something to our viewers, what would it be?
So I guess what I would say is, we talked a bit about death today and how the dead are sort of affecting the living, and how that, how dead can rule the living and their impact on things, right? One of the things that I oftentimes say in my classes, and I think it's really appropriate here, is that when we think about the past, I think your feeling is always that the past is somehow over, that it's in the past, it's done, and it can't change, right? That's not true. The past is always changing, always. People are always taking their ideas about the present and imprinting them back on the past. So all the things that I've said today, there's a part of me that I sort of brought into that equation, and it's something that I really can't get rid of, right? So there's a part of me that actually interpreted that, and interpreting things, and then sort of putting my own ideas onto the past. And so I suppose the question I would ask you to do is think about how you think about the past, and how much of you is actually being imprinted on that, as opposed to what actually happened. So I guess I'll leave it with that.
All right. And with that, I think that brings us to the end of our episode. Thank you so much for monkeying around with us.
You're very welcome.
And stay tuned for the next episode of the Monkey Mind Lab.
Excellent.